On June 4, 1919, the 19th Amendment was passed. The 19th Amendment states that all citizens have the right to vote regardless of their sex.
However, to truly understand the importance of this event, we must know the backstory of it.
The first time that the fight for women's rights truly came into light was 1848. During this time, more women began to get upset with their lack of rights and the way they were treated, and eventually a convention was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott in Seneca Falls.
This convention was a key moment in the revolution for women's rights. Frederick Douglass, an important political figure at the time, also attended the event and advocated for reform. He spoke about how abolition and women's rights are intertwined. Around 300 people came to the event and about 100 signed a document called Declaration of Sentiments. This document was a call to action for all women, stating that they should receive equal rights. It demanded the right to vote and officially marked the beginning of the organized efforts to grant equal rights.
As more women came together to fight the unjust laws, a group emerged. In 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton created NWSA, National Women's Suffrage Association, that focused on convincing the country as a whole by getting amendments to the Constitution.
Another group was formed and led by Lucy Stone. This group was called AWSA, American Women's Suffrage Association. This group rivaled the NWSA, but in 1890, the two groups merged to create NAWSA, National American Women's Suffrage Association.
AWSA went state by state, focusing on smaller areas rather than focusing on the country as a whole. They believed that if they won enough states over, eventually there would be enough pressure to force the president into taking action.
They spread their beliefs by writing articles for local newspapers, distributing pamphlets, and conventions to discuss women's suffrage.
Then, in 1872, Susan B. Anthony illegally voted in the presidential election. Although Anthony was successful in voting, she was arrested 2 weeks later and was fined $100. However, Anthony never paid the money, saying, "I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty."
Women all over the country were making an impact. In 1890, the state of Wyoming granted women to vote, being the first to do this. The territory had originally allowed women to vote, but when Wyoming officially became a state, it kept the right for women to vote in its constitution.
In 1913, women of the NAWSA marched in Pennsylvania to protest against the unfair laws against women. Inez Milholland rode a white horse named Grey Dawn. She wore a white dress and a golden tiara with a star on top to symbolize hope.
Behind Milholland was over 5,000 marchers. They walked through Pennsylvania Avenue with many supporters.
2 years later, Maria Kinberg and Ingeborg Kindset bought an overland at the 1915 World Fair. They planned on driving it to the East Coast because Alice Paul was planning on transcontinental delegation to get signatures to pressure Congress to make a federal amendment.
The two agreed to donate their vehicle to the cause, and they created a group. The group consisted of Sarah Bard Field, Maria Kinberg, Ingeborg Kindstedt, and Frances Joliffe, who focused on gathering signatures, and Nell Richardson and Alice Burke, who drove the vehicle.
The initial part of the journey began with taking the women through California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas. A woman named Mabel Vernon traveled ahead of the women and organized conventions, events, and rallies for them. The trip was extremely exhausting for the women as they faced rain, sleet, and dust storms. Eventually, one of the women, Frances Joliffe, had to drop out because of the difficulty of the tour. However, the other women continued to Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri.
The women then went to a few quick stops at Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York City, Delaware, and Maryland. Finally, they reached their last stop in Washington, D.C. on December 6, 1915. The beat-down travel car slowly drove down the Baltimore Turnpike with a banner in the front that read, "On to Congress." The group stepped out of the car and were met with a crowd that celebrated their arrival. They assembled for a parade led by John J. White. The petition, which was held by a few women, was about 19,000 feet. When the parade reached the Capitol, several congressmen standing quickly spoke with the travelers, and the parade moved on to the White House. Once they arrived there, they were greeted by President Woodrow Wilson, and the group of women that were involved in the transcontinental tour were escorted into the East Room along with 300 other guests where they spoke for the president.
This was an extremely important event for the battle for women's suffrage, and it is a key event that led to the 19th Amendment.
2 years later, Alice Paul organized a protest at the White House. She and other women held up banners protesting the voting laws. The women called themselves the Silent Sentinels, as they protested peacefully, only using the banners. They were arrested for a short time and fined.
However, the women refused to pay the fine and were released. This process continued, and eventually most of them were sent to a prison called Occoquan. The conditions were extremely harsh, with maggot-infested food and rats everywhere.
The superintendent of Occoquan, W.H. Whitaker, was fed up with the suffragists. By now, most of the women were arrested and held there, so on November 14th, he decided to teach them a lesson.
Whitaker ordered 40 men to beat the women. Their limbs were twisted, they were clubbed, and slammed into walls. Their treatment was so brutal, some of them were left unconscious. This was called the Night of Terror.
After the Night of Terror, the women arranged a hunger strike. Whitaker was afraid that one of the women would die and this would cause more attention. He had some of the women transferred to another prison and had them force-fed through their nostrils. This caused terrible nosebleeds.
When the other suffragists learned about the events that took place, they were determined to make it public. They hired Dudley Field Malone to represent them in court.
Malone married Doris Stevens, a prisoner at Occoquan. He had her prison letters published to a newspaper. In court, the women also appealed their arrests.
The case went before the D.C. Court of Appeals in 1918. All three judges decided that the women had been illegally arrested, illegally convicted, and illegally imprisoned.
After the women were released, they continued protesting at the White House. The amount of press surrounding them after they won the court case increased, and President Wilson was extremely pressured. He said that women's suffrage was urgently needed and that Congress needed to act soon.
The women continued to protest outside the White House, and until 1919, the Supreme Court passed the 19th Amendment. 300 members of the House of Representatives voted yes, and 89 members voted no. The 19th Amendment states the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Although many people were in favor of this new amendment, the majority of the population were unhappy with it. Many still viewed women as inferior, and some women believed that their role was to be a housewife.
This led to many more rights for women. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was signed by John F. Kennedy. It stated that employers were required to pay their employees in the same regardless of their sex.
Later, in 1972, Title IX, a part of the Education Amendment, was created. This banned discrimination of any program that is financially assisted by the government. Before Title IX, about 300,000 girls were playing in high school sports. Today, almost 3 million girls are playing in sports. There are many more examples of the important things the 19th Amendment brought, and it left a lasting impact on the world today.
Although men and women were not entirely equal, this event was a great milestone for girls everywhere. It proved that women can make an impact with their voice. Without the efforts of many protesters, this would have never happened. They pressured the president to take action, and in doing so, the protesters caused the 19th Amendment.
Even today, the battle for equal rights isn't over, but if we continue to fight like the ones before us, we too can help with real-world issues.